On October 29, 1929, the U.S. stock market lost about 12% of its value in a single day. That crash gets blamed for the Great Depression constantly, but here's the detail most people skip. The crash itself didn't cause a decade of 25% unemployment. What came after it did. The Federal Reserve had a choice in the following months and made almost the opposite choice of what most economists today agree it should have. So what if it had chosen differently? What if the Great Depression, as we know it, never happened at all? The obvious answer sounds simple. Without the crash, the 1930s just looked like normal, prosperous years. No breadlines, no Dust Bowl migrants, nothing changes. That's not really where this leads. Start with what actually turned a stock market crash into a decade-long catastrophe. After the crash, thousands of banks began failing because there was no deposit insurance yet. So when a bank ran out of cash, people's savings simply vanished. The Federal Reserve, instead of pumping money into the system to stop the panic, tightened it, raising interest rates in 1931 specifically to defend the gold standard. Milton Friedman and Anna Schwartz spent years studying this exact decision and concluded that this single policy choice, not the stock crash itself, turned a bad recession into the worst economic collapse in American history. Here's the detail that rarely makes it into the popular version of this story. Congress made it worse on purpose. In 1930, congressmen passed the Smoot-Hawley Act, raising import taxes on over 20,000 goods, trying to protect American jobs. Other countries retaliated with their own tariffs almost immediately, and global trade collapsed by roughly 65% over the next few years. Economists across the political spectrum today generally agree this made the downturn dramatically worse. Remove that one piece of legislation, and international trade likely keeps functioning, which means fewer countries slide into their own depressions alongside the U.S. So picture the alternate world where the Fed loosens instead of tightens, and Congress never passes Smoot-Hawley. The 1929 crash still happens, since that part was driven by genuine speculative excess, but it likely resolves as a sharp, painful recession lasting maybe 2 or 3 years, similar to other historical downturns, instead of a full decade of mass unemployment. Push that forward, and the political consequences get strange fast. Franklin Roosevelt won the presidency in 1932 almost entirely because Herbert Hoover was blamed for the Depression's severity. Without a decade-long catastrophe to run against, Roosevelt's landslide victory becomes far less certain. And without Roosevelt in office for over a decade, the entire New Deal, Social Security, the SEC, federal deposit insurance, banking regulations that still exist today, potentially never gets created in the same sweeping form. Some of it might arrive eventually, piece by piece, under different administrations, but the concentrated burst of government expansion that defined mid-century America likely doesn't happen the same way. And there's a much larger consequence buried even deeper in this. The Depression left millions of unemployed young men available for rapid military mobilization once World War II began, and wartime spending is widely credited by economists as what actually ended the Depression for good. Without a Depression-scale labor surplus already sitting idle, America's industrial mobilization for the war might move slower, less explosively, which could shift the entire timeline and outcome of the war itself in ways nobody can fully predict. We like to imagine the Great Depression as an unavoidable disaster, one bad crash spiraling naturally into a decade of suffering. But zoom in on the actual decisions made in the months after that crash, and it looks a lot more like a series of choices, at the Fed, in Congress, that turned a recession into a catastrophe. The stock market didn't create the Great Depression. The response to it did.